Hello, good afternoon, Jim. Thanks for joining me again to talk about cybersecurity for SMBs. It's a super important topic, and I think it's also a great opportunity for the resellers to learn how to transform to an MSP. So I'm really happy that you have decided to visit me again on the channel and talk about this important topic.
I appreciate it, Magic. It's always great talking to you. You always have great advice and conversation. So I always look forward to this. So thank you.
So let's remind our viewers, what we discussed last time. I'm going to bring you slides because I know you've prepared yourself again. Just a reminder, refresher.
Yeah, last time we talked a lot about the opportunity to get into the cybersecurity realm because there's so much opportunity around SaaS and other security issues. We know that the SMB market has some reliability questions for current MSPs, and with that 45%, feeling that way, and then almost 3/4 aren't confident that they're prepared or they're ready to protect against a cyber attack. On the flip side of that, some of the bad stats, the stuff we don't like to talk about, is that we know that most, 52% of incidents and breaches affect that small to mid-sized market. The $10.5 trillion cost to our economy is huge. It's impacting not just the large organizations, but definitely the small organizations, specifically those small business owners, right, that have to fund that cost if there's a cybercrime. And then we hit that dwell time. We talk about this a lot. If you're not familiar with dwell time it's the amount of time a bad actor is in an environment before they're discovered. And that's hit 24 days. That's a long time to be in an environment undetected, capturing information and doing, bad things. So just a couple of stats out there that we talk about to just show there's a concern in the SMB world that they're maybe not protected as they need to be. And it's being reinforced with the data saying they're heavily targeted. It's very expensive. And there's still a lot of risk out there that we're not getting our arms around.
We spoke about this, and we spoke that there's the number of vectors that are increasing, attack vectors that are increasing, and the kind of a super customization of the attacks and the amount of attacks that are growing. More and more SMBs will be vulnerable, and if they don't have someone, if they don't have you, the MSP, the reseller, the partner, to help them to protect themselves, they're in trouble because they typically have to pay the ransom. They typically don't survive the cyber attack. Most of the companies that are kind of impacted by the cyber attack, cyber crime, they might lose everything: money, data, credibility with their customers, right?
Oh, you're hitting it. And some of the numbers don't always really align super well with small businesses, but we know the average ransomware payout is $570,000. And, I know in my days of owning a small business, that would have been a significant sum to have to pay out to try to restore the business. Most businesses can't handle that. Now, maybe a very small business might have $100,000 or $200,000 payout, but still that is significantly impactful to their operating expense and the cost. And we know this. So we're trying to say, how can we start to fill those voids to protect organizations?
So what do SMBs really need, from MSPs to help them to secure their environment?
Yeah, you're good segue into the conversation. When we think of any business, and we like to target SMBs because we know they need a lot of services and a lot of help, and it's just a huge opportunity. But that opportunity continues to grow as we continually add things into the network. But across the board, right, businesses of all sizes need a comprehensive threat visibility, meaning we can see threats from all different angles. Not everything attacks email, right? There's attacks on the endpoints, on the networks, on the servers in our SaaS applications. We need to be able to see kind of holistically where the attacks are coming from. These attacks are getting more sophisticated all the time.
On SharePoint,
great example, yeah. Yeah, great example. We look and there's I think 200 zettabytes, if I'm getting this number right, of data out in the world today. Half is online, half is on premise. And we look at that massive amount of data that's online in some sort of SaaS application. Now, a lot of it's in Microsoft 365 and SharePoint, like you're talking about, but a lot of it's in many other locations. And we don't think about those being a risk natively. We think those businesses are protecting them. But when we might have talked about the shared responsibility matrix last time. We know that there's a responsibility that when you sign the contract that you hold for the security. And so all of these things, how we respond, how we investigate, how we produce information is getting more and more challenging because there's more and more things that we have to uncover. And not that I'm going to stat everybody consistently, but this one is really important to me because it tells that 47% of SMBs would consider changing MSPs for the right cybersecurity solution. They know that their risks are growing. They know they're signing up for more things, and maybe their current vendor can't provide the security that they need. So they're always looking to say, do I have the right solution? Am I protected? Am I at risk? And the answer is, unfortunately, yeah, but it creates so much opportunity for VARs, for MSPs, and for IT security providers.
I believe it's becoming a kind of a table stakes. So if you are not offering cybersecurity protection for your customer, somebody is, and they will be taking over, or somebody will be very, very shortly, and they will be taking over your business, because from that they can expand further and further into the customer environment. So it's just my feeling about the cybersecurity as a business opportunity. Yeah, James.
Well, you make a really good point. And when we think of cybersecurity, like when we talk about that to most businesses, they think of this, right? They think of the user, the computer, and I think we talked about this a little bit ago. When most MSPs or IT providers go into an organization, they just ask a couple basic questions. How many users do you have? How many computers do you have? Servers, networks? They ask these really basic questions. And it's important because we do have to protect those. But like I think you mentioned, that's kind of the table stakes today, right? It's kind of the minimum standard to say, I'm going to protect the user from threats. I'm going to protect the systems from threats that we know about, and I'm going to back everything up. That's great. That's not really unique. And it's only covering one area or two areas of the cybersecurity defense. One of the conversations we really want to...
Is there another opportunity?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there anything else that you see as an opportunity in this space?
You're hitting it perfect. Yeah. When we think of the space that's open ground for protection, the PCs, the servers, the users, it's a great area. But there's so many other network connected devices. When we think of HVAC systems or camera systems, access, there's so many different IoT devices, Internet of Things devices that are out there that just get deployed, right? They're just things that are connected to the network. They have risks, they have software, they have vulnerabilities, and we're almost ignoring them from an MSP perspective because we're not sure how to get our arms around it. But specifically, vendors who are selling these services or adjacent to these services, they have a real great opportunity to say, well, how do I manage these to protect organizations?
I think this is
if we look at yeah, go ahead.
This is an interesting question, Jim, because when I think about even my own home, there are so many things that my kids bring and connect to the network, and I connect to the network. All the smart home environment is something that's really, 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 really interesting. And I'm thinking about all the employees that could bring stuff to work and connect it, starting with like smartwatches and phones, okay, but ending up with all the different other things that people would just bring from different conferences and from the different places, and they just connect it to the Wi-Fi without thinking about it too much, right?
Yeah, you hit most of these. When you think of the personal side, most of these home or personal automation devices are trying to make our life easier, a little bit better, right? You think of the phones, the watches, like you mentioned, Ring doorbells, Nest thermostats, all these, not that I should do too many brand names, but you know what I'm saying? All these things we connect to our home network, a lot of times also getting connected to those business networks. And in a lot of cases, even signing up for a service that a business may need for some sort of automation, for HVAC maintenance, for security systems, we're trusting those vendors to put the systems in and protect them. but we're not always, like you talked about, maybe segmenting those and protecting the business data and the inside information from those specific devices, which is kind of a challenge because they go in, they get plugged in, and we rarely think about them again.
I typically, as a minimum, what I do is I put them on a separate Wi-Fi. Okay, so I created a separate Wi-Fi just for the IoT devices because they don't need to be accessed directly by by most of the home members, other than in a way that I can control. But I'm not sure if this is the best security that I can offer, for home. And at home I don't have that many things. Okay, but if I think about the small and medium business, that has this considerable amount of data and an office and everything else, seems like an open door.
It's a great point. Yeah, and it's a real risk. You're right, because I would go buy my doorbell camera and plug it in myself. But in business world, you could have somebody that doesn't even know that they had an IoT device installed because of a third-party service that was added. There's just so many things that could come in our network. And this is a really interesting point that we were kind of talking about. When we go into those conversations and we're having cybersecurity, a debate or a presentation to talk about their systems, we rarely say, we do ask, right, about the users, the computers, the servers, things like that. We rarely ask, how are you protecting your IoT devices? How are you making sure that the data that they're pulling in doesn't leak out to the rest of the world? And these are real risks. And I don't know that we always can wrap our mind around that, because they think, oh, it's just a security camera. What do I worry about that? Like, well,
it's a security camera, Jim. It's a security camera. It must be secure.
Exactly. It should be secure, right? It should be secure, and it shouldn't be able to risk your data. And, it may sound a little far-fetched, but there are examples. There was a Ricotta camera hack that happened several years ago at this point. But, these cameras were everywhere, and 150,000 of them had this limited access that happened because there was an administrator username and password on those devices that the end users didn't even know about. And so the systems were hacked, the cameras were accessed. And if you think about them being in a business environment, that's one thing. They may be able to capture some business information, but they were in hospitals, in jails, in schools, in tech companies. And while we don't think of that being a breach, it is a breach because they can capture information through those cameras. And but again, we isolate them and think, well, they didn't get on my server, so I'm not worried. But we need to worry about this.
Think about all those kind of famous examples of IoT devices that were giving away the locations of the secret kind of a military bases because people were running with a smartwatches for going for a run in the morning, right? And on Strava, you could kind of figure out the place. This is data being leaked, and this data could be used to figure out more stuff about your company and how you operate and what you do and how to access some other information. So I mean, we spoke about it a lot, but it is an important element, right? And I think it's now that when you talk about this, that you brought it to my attention, Jim, it should be a great business opportunity for most of the MSPs that are already well established on the cybersecurity side, because I can imagine that a lot of customers that even have this basic coverage, let's say, they probably don't think about the IoT devices. And it would be great to go to those customers and say, hey, look, I know that you have an antivirus and you have MFA and all the kind of a basic stuff. How about your IoT stuff? Are you protecting it? Do you know how to deal with that?
Perfect question, and that is kind of the unique way of going in and talking to someone about something they don't always hear, about a risk that they may not have thought of before. When we think of IoT devices, we think of a lot of challenges out there. Typically, some of them are very secure. So I'm not trying to say that all IoT devices are the same. Some of them are very insecure. They may have minimal security. And when we think about that deployment, like you said, you may be putting them all on this separate wireless network. And a business may have an intention to do that, but then they find the one that gets plugged into the internal network. This deployment inconsistency can be a real challenge because we typically don't have any process or policies around them. Somebody just signs up for it, so they show up one day and plug it in, and we don't think about them being their own inherent risk or leaking sensitive information or being that breach point. But that is exactly what they can be if we don't take the steps to protect them properly.
Absolutely.
So, there's, yeah.
What are the recommendations, Jim? Do you have some kind of advice for people how to deal with this kind of stuff? What to do if you want to protect yourself?
Yeah, we'll typically put most of the things into 3 steps just to keep it easy and pretty straightforward. With this or with any type of technology, we always want to say, what's the acceptable use of this? What do we want to allow to have happen? And then what's the process for it getting approved? When we think about an acceptable use policy for IoT devices, we think if anything's going to get plugged into the network, and this should probably be across the board, right? Not just IoT, but before anything gets plugged into a network, we take these steps. We isolate it, like you say. We make sure it's fully updated. We make sure it has multi-factor authentication deployed. We do these things. Otherwise, it doesn't get plugged in. And that's kind of step 1. Like say, hey, let's create a policy around it. As you know, policies are great, and the paper is amazing. But without enforcement, it can be a real challenge. So we'll say and this is where I think it's really interesting from an MSP or an IT service provider or a VAR to really step in, because anybody can help write a policy. But now taking that step to enforce it, we're not going to allow things to connect to the network, like from a technical standard, until it's past the acceptable use policy. So they plug it in and it doesn't connect. We want the technology to take over to reinforce the policy. So many times we write down what we expect users to do, and they follow it as long as they think they're following it. But through negligence or compliance or even like malicious intent, we can bypass that. We want technology to back up policies. And from there, we need something from a cybersecurity side to protect us. So we can put the policy in place, we can defend it with technology, but we'll say anything that gets plugged into the network will decay over time. If we don't have our tools telling us the vulnerabilities that are out there, making sure we have a plan to remediate those vulnerabilities or remove it from the network, we really don't have a long-term plan. We have a short-term plan. So we're going to say these 3 things, right? Build that policy, enforce that policy with technology, and then continually scan and search that network for vulnerabilities so that you can find new things that may have bypassed those 2, or you can find vulnerabilities in that hardware and patch it.
So everything starts with people, right? So teaching your people, like setting up certain parameters, certain kind of rules within the organization, having a process, having something documented and defined, and making sure that everybody knows about it, okay? Then aligning your technology to make sure that it's kind of applying those standards, enforcing those standards, and then finally, whatever you can detect, like for me, it's whenever there is a new device that is connecting to the network, I get a notification, okay? And whenever I'm giving very simple examples, Jim, but and it's a bit of a joke, okay? Because I also don't allow at home, for example, for people outside of the households to connect to the network. So I have a guest network. And whenever friends of my kids come over and they want to connect their devices to the network, I don't allow them to use the standard password and the standard Wi-Fi, but I have a guest network. And for my kids, the password, they know the password and they can share this password, and the password is very open. It goes, "I love my daddy." So if they want their friends to connect to the network, they say, "Here's the network," and the password is, "I love my daddy."
I love it. Yeah. So if you want a password, I have to say it.
So nevertheless, I think it's a bit of a joke, but I think you can appreciate that I'm trying to put this kind of a thinking in place. But that should be the approach that every small and medium business should do and should require MSP to put in place for them, correct?
Absolutely. I think we're really talking about this because we see it as such an opportunity, because most IT service providers or MSPs don't really focus on this area. They're just focused on the other areas, leaving this as a vulnerability, but also a huge opportunity to create those kind of policies. And again, I think everybody should make their wireless password "I love my daddy" in honor of you, so that we can kind of get that going, or at least their guest password. So
Tell me, Jim, uh, how, if we have resellers and MSPs out there, there's acceptable use policies. Are there any good examples, any kind of a templates, any things that people can use as a template, something like a best practice? Where to search for this kind of information? Do you have any recommendation for people?
yeah, and this is kind of using technology to help ourselves. In reality, most of us today are working our acceptable use policies in things like ChatGPT. We put in the information into AI saying, "This is my type of business. This is the data I hold. This is the compliance I have. Can you help me build an Internet of Things policy to determine where things should go?" And it's just going to give you that rough framework. It's not the finalized document. We still need to make sure we edit that and make sure it really applies to us. And if we have to have legal review of that. But at the end of the day, it's hard to find a better place than AI to start frameworking or framing out policies.
I also know that there was
I don't know if you've seen this.
some kind of
Yeah.
a government led initiative. I don't know if it's still out there. That was kind of defining like the framework and the information, how to protect yourself. Maybe there's some information out there. I need to do the research on this, because I think it would be good to show maybe some templates on, what are some of the examples of this kind of acceptable use policies, saying, that are applicable to some kind of IoT devices. Maybe it's yet another kind of
Yeah.
a topic that we could cover in one of our next discussions.
No, that'd be great. And at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that it is tuned for that type of business, the type of policy or type of data they have, the type of organization, their compliance requirement. And there's probably 5 or 10 different variables in there to make sure we really get that right policy that fits their needs. But a basic policy is even better than no policy. So we always want to try to at least move the ball forward.
Well, you have to start somewhere, okay? Set the policy, train your people on it, let them know, and also, set the policy. That's another kind of set the policy that you can enforce later on, because having a policy that you cannot police, kind of a mute, I guess.
Yeah, great point.
Jim, thank you so much for the conversation today. It's yet another kind of a great piece of advice, great area of business opportunity for a lot of VARs and MSPs out there to think about, and to potentially get some further education. Jim, obviously, and a ConnectWise team on security can give advice and recommendation and help. Jim, right?
Absolutely. We're here to help. Whether you're an MSP or looking to become an MSP or provide cybersecurity services, we're here to help you out.
Okay. Jim, thank you so much for today, for the discussion. And I hope to have another chat with you soon. Okay.
I'll look forward to it. Always appreciate you, Magic, and thank you for the time.
Thank you.